My name is Dr. Dana Ehret, and I am the Assistant Curator of Natural History at the New Jersey State Museum. My research is primarily in fossil sharks. I've worked on describing an extinct species of fossil white shark called Carcharodon hubbelli from the Pacific Basin. Done work on the extinction of Megalodon. I also work on fossil turtles as well as that.
You were talking about Otodus and Carcaricles.
Mhm.
Why are those different? Because that's one of those things I remember when I was growing up. It was still Carcharodon, and then
Yeah.
very early on swept to Carcaricles. Now it's Otodus. So what's kind of going on with the taxonomy there?
Yeah, well, this is a good case of taxonomy versus phylogeny. Primarily with sharks, I mean, having cartilaginous skeletons for the most part, we don't get full body preservation. We primarily get teeth. And in sharks, we have a lot of homoplasia. We have similar characteristics arising multiple different times and multiple different lineages because they're using those teeth to do a specific thing, grab and eat food. And so that same shape and morphology arises over and over again. So it's really hard to try to do phylogenetic analyses on fossil shark teeth because you have just very the same kind of
Yeah,
patterns arise over and over again.
yeah, I remember.
So what we're left with is really going back to a more of a Linnaean taxonomical system for naming these fossil sharks, and again based on just characteristics of their teeth. So when Agassiz described Megalodon back in 1843, 1844, he said, well, they're big triangle teeth with serrations on it. Great white sharks have big triangle teeth with serrations on them. They're both Carcharodon. Um,
That doesn't seem like the most unreasonable thing to make right away,
no, not
right?
not at all, not at all. And we can see in the early 20th century, multiple different researchers suggested that they are not the same. Hannibal and Jordan in the 1920s. We had um, um, Glickman in the 1950s, 1960s. There and a few others. I'm going to forget them all. I'm not going to go through the whole taxonomic history,
Yeah, it's
but they did recognize and they suggested other names. So Carcaricles came from Hannibal and Jordan, and then we have Megasolacus, which has also been proposed. Um, and it really didn't change, even though they were published in the literature until the early 2000s. And it was more or less a scientific consensus that yes, Megalodon and its lineage, the other megatooth sharks, are not Carcharodon. They're not in the same genus. They're not even in the same family. And we revisited a lot of these earlier researchers that had posited these other names, um, and so it's still changed.
with Megalodon. Part of the reason I know there was some shakeup about when it went extinct recently. Um, and so I guess I didn't know if I couldn't remember what the exact dates were, and so I couldn't remember exactly if it did make it through Miocene into Pliocene or not. So what was the mix up and how is that figured out? Or
Yeah, I
the
mean,
shake up, not mix up.
yeah, it was a very small change. It wasn't that overly significant, but it's really looking at global scale. So we're using big data sets. We're using the PaleoBio database. We're using some of these websites where they're compiling data from museum collections across the world. And it's important to try to ground truth some of that information. Certainly, working in Florida where I did, there's a lot of shark teeth that come from phosphate mine pits, where you have multiple different formations that are all being dug out simultaneously. It's very easy to get teeth out of context. They can just fall down a hillside or get scooped up incorrectly. So, part of it is just making sure that you have good data when you're working on these large data sets like that. And of course, we're constantly, we as a scientific community are constantly refining the time period. So there was a bit of a shift in the Plio-Pleistocene boundary fairly recently. But we do believe that Megalodon did make it into the Pliocene, but certainly not the Pleistocene. Yeah. So it's really, again, just working with the data sets and trying to verify to the best of our ability good data versus bad data.
Moving into the idea of there's no such thing as a stupid question, you're saying Megalodon is actually extinct. Are you sure?
Yes, I am positive. And I get this question. I honestly have to say, I get this question almost every day. My museum has been closed. We're about to reopen in another week or two. But I get this question almost every day when I talk to kids, when I talk to school groups, when I talk to families visiting. Megalodon is extinct. We know, based on where we find the teeth of Megalodon, that it was living on the continental shelves. It was eating things like whales. So it wasn't a deep sea species. This was a species that would have been seen along the coastlines of the continents. And with the billions of people that we have on Earth today, with all of the fishing that we have occurring, with all of the people, fishing, surfing, boating, and not one person has seen or encountered a megalodon. I am positive that it is no longer alive today. What I like to say is, when we talk about the extinction of megalodon and why, there's no one smoking gun. There's no one reason why. There's probably a bunch of reasons that we're working together. But one thing that we see is after that middle late Miocene, we see a sharp decline in the diversity of marine mammals. And so animals like Leviathan and Megalodon probably evolved to have these large body sizes in times when the food resources were there and available. And then when those food resources start to drop off decline, we have temperatures getting colder and different species moving. All of a sudden, you have a shark or a whale that's so big, and it probably might not have had enough resources anymore to continue. And of course, with the advent of the movie The Meg, which I did some interviews with outlets like Vulture after the movie came out, well, maybe it's hiding in the Marianas Trench. I get that question a lot. Megalodon was a shark that was over 50 feet long. We had an exhibit that's been touring the country called Megalodon, the largest shark that ever lived, where we estimated an adult female would have to eat on average over a ton of food per day. There is not over a ton of food per day for a population of megalodons in the Marianas Trench. Yes, there may be giant squids, but not enough of them to feed them. And a species that would have had to adapt to live down there would not be the same species that we find in the fossil record. If something like that were there, it wouldn't be the same thing.
So you were also saying that the length was over 50 feet. How reasonable? Well, can you give me an upper and a lower bound of reasonable estimates?
Yeah, I know a colleague of mine, Victor Perez, just recently came out with a paper with really good estimates. I think they were saying, he and colleagues, 50 to 55 feet. That's I am pretty much in that camp and always have been. I'm sure I would say 40 to 50 to 55 feet is a good range. 50, 55 being the limit. I've heard all kinds of different takes on it. Maybe it was just a small shark with a really big mouth. Yeah, no, that's not true. And of course, estimates of 70 to 100 feet long. I think I even feel like 60 is really would be pushing the maximum on it. I'm much more comfortable in the 50 to 55 foot range.
With normal variation, maybe a couple got to 60, but that's
Yeah,
not their regular
right.
size.
Right,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah.
Gosh, I'm just sitting here with the idea of a small shark with big teeth. And it's like, yeah, it'd be so top heavy. The whole thing would just swim downwards all the time.
Well, and certainly, yeah. I mean, the teeth, obviously they're fossilized, so they're heavier. But I mean, this is a restored tooth, yeah. But I mean, these are heavy teeth. I mean, you need a big mouth with a lot of muscle behind it to open and close that mouth.
And a lot of the time it's
Um,
shown swimming, super fast, kind of hunting like great whites do at the surface. So if is that a reasonable assumption to make for its hunting strategy? B, if it's going through those kinds of forces, something like a ligament holding it there would make a lot more sense too, just to help kind of keep it in the mouth.
Yeah, again, we only have the teeth of megalodon and a handful of vertebrae, and so it's really hard to make reconstructions of how it fed or how fast it moved or even proportions of the body itself. Like in large female great whites, they actually get pretty round. They kind of get barrel shaped, versus something like a mako that's much more streamlined and thin. Was megalodon more round or barrel shaped? We can't tell from teeth and their vertebrae. We know that they were feeding, on the continental shelf, fairly near shore. And some of the work that I had done with colleagues at the University of Florida, we had published a paper on a potential nursery area for megalodon down in Panama. Um, so they were certainly using nearshore areas, and they were in the same areas that great whites were, especially towards the end of the megalodons, and the beginning of when white sharks first show up in the fossil record. So they were definitely overlapping and sharing the same spaces and eating the same things in a lot of cases.
So that was one of those things that actually does get me towards some of the body shape questions, because when you were on the Megalodon Factor Fiction on Discovery Channel, you mentioned that we can try and extrapolate from fin shape, like or what kind of fin shape it may have had, some of the behaviors. Is there any like estimate on that? Because I know like some sharks have different fin shapes for different things, right? Like short fin mako, it's in the name, it had short fins, right? So is there anything like that which we might suggest, or is that kind of a until we find it, it's hard to figure it out?
Yeah, I mean, there's been some great papers that have come out recently on megalodon. I know there's a couple different groups working on trying to figure out more about the biology of it. And it's kind of funny. We talk about we use the genus Otodus or Carcaricles, not Carcharodon anymore. But when it comes to trying to determine what megalodon looked like, how it might have acted, how it might have grown, we go right to the modern white shark as a comparison, because even if they're not that closely related, we believe they were in separate families, but they were doing very similar things. They do have large triangular serrated teeth. We know that both were feeding on marine mammals. And so, using the modern white shark, which can grow up to lengths of about 20 feet today, bigger in the past based on isolated teeth, we really use the white shark as a modern analog for what megalodon might have been, what might have looked like, how long, and also body shape. You know, we know that within the lamniform, the order Lamniformes, the mackerel sharks, which include things like your makos, your the white shark, poor beagle sharks, sand tigers, and then a few outliers, things like basking sharks, right? for the most part, the body shape is fairly consistent, except for those kind of outliers, the filter feeding ones. So, it's really making educated guesses on what we know about somewhat similar related species today.
If you could find a dream shark fossil, which I know is a very vague and broad category, what kind of thing would you be looking to try and find?
Well,
Hoping to try and find.
um, I mean, since I've been working on fossil sharks, professionally, especially in Peru, every 12 to 18 months, I get this mysterious email that another megalodon skeleton has been found in Peru, and a lot of times I get blurry pictures, or some are whale vertebrae, and some are shark vertebrae. There's images of a specimen that was on display, I believe, in Switzerland,
Hmm.
where it appears to be associated megalodon teeth, and possibly some cartilage. But the vertebrae that are extending back obviously are much smaller than the teeth that are associated with it. So,
Okay.
not having seen the specimen, I don't think I think it's a composite. So, obviously for me, finding an articulated megalodon specimen would really be um
Incredible.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, early in the 1800s, an associated set of teeth and vertebrae was found in Belgium, and there have been vertebrae found that are definitively megalodon, but not, a complete set. Typically, the teeth, are more or less in a pile, so you lose that articulation again. Like I said, the size of the second anterior tooth, is it bigger than the first anterior tooth? Which direction does the third anterior slash intermediate tooth, which way does it curve? Those are characteristics that modern shark biologists use to differentiate species, and so we kind of lose that in the fossil record a lot of the times.
Going back, I keep going back to the megalodon thing because it's exciting and all this, but not. But
Sure, sure.
um, I just wanted to discuss. They mentioned if it was alive, what would the world be like? And a lot of people mentioned, oh, it's going to be really rough on whales. And there was one person on there who was like, oh, I don't want to touch the water, and I'm like, I think there would be a lot of geotourism for people trying to go, maybe not cage diving with it, but helicopter tours or something. Would
Sure.
would you have been one of those people who would absolutely do that to go see a giant shark?
I'll give you a little bit of background about that Discovery show
Hmm.
before I answer your question. So, for the couple years leading up to that show in particular, there were multiple mockumentaries about Megalodon being alive, and I I gave some suggestions or some helpful hints to Riley Black, who was a writer at the time for National Geographic, their blogs. And Riley wrote a piece every year, talking about how could you do this again to us, Discovery Channel. Megalodon is not still alive. So when they finally came to their senses and put together that show, they came to me because I had been harping. I was one of the vocal critics for the multiple years leading up to it. So I appreciated them giving me the chance to refute some of those mockumentaries, and I appreciate Riley for publishing those pieces as well. Um, yeah, yeah, I think, yeah, there probably, of course, people would want to see a megalodon. I don't know if they were always around. It probably wouldn't be. I mean, I'm sure it would be a big deal, but if they just magically appeared today, yeah, there would be a lot more hype to see it than if they had never gone extinct and they were always being around, always around. But sure, I'm sure there's tourism. I mean, people love to go to places like South Africa and off the Farallon Islands off of California today. to get a chance to see the white sharks off the coast today. So I can't imagine that anybody wouldn't want to see a megalodon up close and personal, or at least somewhat up close and personal, if they were still around. I certainly would like to. I've never gone diving with sharks. I've helped do dissections on white sharks and other sharks that have recently expired, but I'm more for the fossils. I'm certainly not afraid of sharks. I live near the beach. I go to the beach all the time, but I just have more of an affinity for the long dead ones.